Good morning. I'm so glad to be here. I want to first of all give a shout out to those who are watching by video at the East Campus. Welcome. And I want to thank you for your partnership with World Help, especially in Guatemala. You know, we believe in partnerships that with the Ministry of Hope of Life in Guatemala, Grace Church, and World Help, if we come together and partner together and not care who gets the credit, more can be accomplished by the three of us working together than can be accomplished by the three of us working separately. So on behalf of World Help, thank you for your partnership. And I'm so glad to be here today. Of course, I'm a cancer survivor, so I'm glad to be anywhere today. Several years ago, the doctors discovered a tumor that had attached itself to my heart and lungs. They told me if they'd waited one more week to remove it, it would have been too late. It would have been fatal. They sent me home to get my affairs in order and told me there was a good chance that I might not survive. And during that first surgery, in order to remove the tumor, they had to remove a third of my left lung. They severed the nerve to my diaphragm, which is still paralyzed, and my vocal cords, which one side is still paralyzed. So for 2 years, I could only speak with a high-pitched whisper, much like a 6-year-old child. I endured 18 surgeries and surgical procedures, 2.5 years of chemotherapy and radiation treatments, and many days near death. And almost every day was painful, and some days I even lost hope. And at the time I was battling cancer, I thought my life was over. The doctors told me I would never preach again. Aren't you glad doctors are sometimes wrong? You know, obviously, I don't want to spoil it for you, but I survived. And I wrote a book about my trials. It's entitled Why? Answer to Weather the Storms of Life. And it's out in the front of the church, and it's free. And the reason it's free is because my son says, "Dad, no one will pay money to buy your books." I said, "Well, son, that wasn't very nice of you to say." He said, "No, really." He said, "I saw your Why book on eBay for $0.25. He said, "and it was autographed." He said, "That's embarrassing, Dad." So I don't want to embarrass anyone here today, so they're free. Take one. You know, 1 in 4 Americans will die of cancer. So if there's no one in your family that is battling cancer, you probably have a dear friend. So take one, and I just pass it on to others. But obviously, one of the happiest days of my life was the day the doctors told me I was in remission. And through the miracle of modern medicine, they operated one more time to inject Teflon into my vocal cords so that I could speak again. One of the side benefits of Teflon is that, ladies, nothing sticks on the way down. It just slides right down. As you can tell, I'm in robust health. I ran into a friend of mine a while back. He said, "You've put on some weight since the last time I saw you." I said, "Well, the last time you saw me, I was nearly dead." I said, "I'd rather be fat than dead." That's my life motto if you want to write it down in your notes. I'd rather be fat than dead. At that time, World Help hadn't even begun. I didn't realize that when I thought my life was over, that the greatest work that God had for me came after the greatest trial in my life. And obviously, cancer changed my perspective on everything. I now stop to smell the flowers. I pause to watch the sunset. And I value every minute I spend with my family. Cancer changed the way I live. My battle with cancer caused me also to be totally dependent on God, who is my only hope. So now, I try to live my life in such a way that every day I accomplish at least one thing that will outlive me and last for eternity. And after surviving that 2-year battle with cancer, my immune system was weak. I was susceptible to colds and flus and every other disease going around. I felt like life had been passing me by, and I felt like I had this need to make up for lost time. And at the time, there was a famine in Africa with thousands of people starving to death in Sudan and Ethiopia. And the world was uniting to do something to help. And I'd been on the sidelines, so I decided to go to Africa with the team of volunteers. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew I had to do something. I wanted to serve. My doctors told me I shouldn't go, but they said, if you're going to go, wash your hands often. Be careful what you eat. Be careful what you touch. Remember, your immune system is compromised. Just be careful. And after much persuasion and arm twisting, they reluctantly agreed to let me go, but not without plenty of warnings and not without plenty of shots. And when we arrived in Nairobi, Kenya, we chartered a small single-engine plane and flew north past the equator all the way to the Sudan border, and we landed on a gravel runway, and in the distance I could see a village of grass huts, about 20 huts in a circle. And I'd never seen a village like that before, except in National Geographic magazine, of course, so I was intrigued. We got off the plane. It was already over 100 degrees. We could feel the unbearable heat and humidity. And we were met by an African pastor who was driving a beat-up old Land Rover. And immediately I asked him if we had time in our itinerary to visit that village of grass huts and take some photos. You know, that's what Americans do on mission trips, is take photos. As we saw this morning, Jesus says, go into all the world and take photos. So I wanted to take some photos. And because of the famine and drought, there was no fresh water anywhere. This particular village of grass huts, they had to send a truck 80 kilometers one way to get water and bring it back to the village every other day, and even it was contaminated. And it was sobering to see tribal women on their knees in dry riverbeds, digging with their bare hands, trying to find water. My pastor friend said they won't find any water, but if they do, it will probably be contaminated also and do them more harm than good. And I'd never seen anything like that before. People dying because of lack of water. People dying because of lack of food. And we arrived at the village of grass huts. It was about noon, only to find it deserted. There wasn't a soul in sight. I began taking my photos and snooping around, and actually went up to one of the huts. It didn't have a door, only an opening with an animal skin covering. And I stuck my head in to look around, and I was surprised to see a little girl, maybe 9 years old, standing just inside the doorway, and she startled me, and I'm sure I startled her. All she was wearing was a pair of dirty pants, no shirt. She was filthy, her hair was matted, her nose was running, her belly was distended. She was showing signs of early malnutrition. There were open running sores all over her body, and the smell was awful. And all I could think about was my doctor's parting words, be careful what you touch. And I was so repulsed that I actually took a step backwards and went, ugh. At that moment, God taught me a lesson that you would have thought I would have already learned, that continues to shape my life to this day. In that instant, God taught me about compassion. You know, you hear the Bible talk about that still small voice of God whispering in your conscience. Well, I didn't hear any audible voices, but I heard that still small voice of God whispering in my conscience, except this time it wasn't a whisper. And here's what I heard. Wait just a minute. Who do you think you are? Do you see that little girl? I love that little girl. I love that little girl as much as I love your little girls back home. I love that little girl so much that I sent my son to die for that little girl. And I've commanded you to love that little girl also. You're saying, did you really hear all that? Every word. Partly out of guilt. I was so convicted. Partly out of impulse. I reached forward and picked up that dirty, smelly little girl and held her tight in my arms. I later found out I was the first white person she had ever seen, so I'm sure I scared her to death. I couldn't speak her language and she couldn't speak mine. All I could do was communicate with her in the international language of love. I held her, I touched her cheek, I tried my best to show her that I cared. And what happened next is still hard for me to believe after all these years. While I was holding that lonely and destitute little girl out from the hut, came her mother and her father and her brothers and her sisters and even her grandparents. I didn't realize that so many people could fit inside of one hut. And not only did her hut empty out, but within minutes, I was surrounded by everyone in that village, several hundred starving and thirsty nomadic Turkana tribesmen and women. I think back of that and say, what happened there? I believe love involves touching. You can't serve by sitting back and observing. You got to get in the game. You got to get your hands dirty. And I think at that moment, when I impulsively picked up that little girl and tried to express love to her, that love permeated that village. And what I saw, I've never forgotten. I saw an elderly woman who was blind. I saw a man with a tumor on his neck, obviously terminal, another man whose leg had swollen 3 or 4 times its normal size. I looked into the eyes of the diseased and the blind and the lame, and for the first time in my life, I'm sorry to admit it, I realized clearly what Jesus must have felt when it says in the Bible that he looked on the multitudes and was moved with compassion. And I felt so helpless. In the face of such great human suffering and need, I turned to my African pastor. I said, do we have anything we can give these people? He said, well, I have a case of cornmeal in the back of my vehicle, and he willingly let me have it, and we gave one small 5-pound bag to each family. You would have thought it was Christmas morning. They were so happy. Everyone was smiling and laughing. They thanked me. Some of them even hugged me, and it left an indelible memory that I've never forgotten. They told me they needed clean water. I didn't even know what it cost to drill a well. But they had me at Clean Water. And I said, I'll go home and raise the money. We'll drill you wells. In the years that followed, we went back to that village just like you were just in that village in Guatemala. We provided the wells that they needed for clean water. We also built a clinic to meet their physical needs. We built a church, and in several years, every person in that village had become a follower of Jesus Christ. So that day, in the middle of a village of grass huts, God taught me compassion. Most of us consider compassion as simply feeling sorry for someone or having a mild touch of pity for someone. But the Bible defines compassion as much more than that. In Matthew, when Jesus was moved with compassion, it wasn't just pity. It literally was suffering together with someone. That's what that word compassion means. Suffering together with someone. When was the last time you suffered together with someone? That's what Jesus did. He suffered with them. You see, pity feels and sees, but compassion touches the need. Jesus held the children. He touched the lepers. He touched the blind man's eyes. When Jesus was confronted with great human need, with death, with disease, with hunger, with the plight of the homeless, he was moved with compassion. My favorite definition of compassion comes from Robert Pierce, who made this statement that's now famous. He said, "Let my heart be broken with the things that break the heart of God." Let my heart be broken with the things that break the heart of God. You see, apart from the Spirit of God, you and I cannot be compassionate people. In fact, when I wake up in the morning, I'm not humming others. Yes, Lord, others. Let this my motto be. When I wake up in the morning, I have one overriding thought. One. And it's this: how quickly can I get caffeine into my system? I've even thought about taking it intravenously if that would help. I've got an app on my phone that shows me every Starbucks in San Diego. I don't only have that, I got an app on my phone. All I have to do is just hold my phone up, bam, and I've paid for it. So, apart from the Spirit of God, when I wake up, I'm not even human, let alone compassion. I'm just like you. I'm concerned about my needs, my family, me. You say, well, how do you overcome that? Every day, every trip, every country, every village, every day I find myself praying, let my heart be broken with the things that break the heart of God. And when I do, my mind goes back to a little girl in a village in Africa, a village of grass huts. And it reminds me of the time that God had compassion on me and spared my life for such a time as this. To be here today with you and to continue to rescue those who need it most. Our greatest desire should be to change the world by being the hands and feet of Jesus on the ground. Or the way we like to say it at World Help, by providing help for today and hope for tomorrow. Everything we do at World Help has a gospel component. What does it accomplish if we go into a village and provide food and medicine and meet their physical needs, only for them to die and spend eternity separated from God? Help for today and hope for tomorrow. And today, Grace Church, I got good news for you. God has a golden invitation for you to join him in serving. To provide here in this church, in this city, in this neighborhood, help for today and hope for tomorrow. To get personally involved. Not just sit there every Sunday morning, but get connected, get involved. To begin practicing compassion in action. To do something that will outlive you and last for eternity. To change the world, to make a difference with help for today and hope for tomorrow. And whatever your passion is, God has a place for you in this church, in this neighborhood, for you to use it for good and to accomplish his purposes. So I'm here this morning with this emphasis on serving to encourage you today to change your perspective, to take a risk. This year, every one of you in this room has an opportunity to do just that, to get out of your comfort zone and take some risks for God. You'll have the opportunity to test your faith by serving others, but don't worry. Where God guides, God provides. On that plane ride home from Africa, I was saying, dear God, what have I committed? What have I done? How am I going to raise money for these water wells? And not only did God provide the money for the water wells, but for the clinic and the church. And God had a plan much bigger than mine. Where God guides, God provides. So just imagine with me this morning, if only one person in this room took that risk, took that step of faith and said, enough is enough. Just imagine this morning if God spoke to them like he did to me. And just imagine if that one person spent the rest of their life serving and fulfilling the vision God has given them. Just imagine hundreds, maybe even thousands, who knows, like me, maybe even millions of lives impacted. Just imagine if that one person was you. Just imagine. Thank you.